All right, in this video, I'm going to be showing you Augment Code, which is an AI IDE extension that's designed for real world work. In this, I'm going to have it go head to head with Cursor with the new DeepSeek R1 model that everyone's been talking about. And I'm going to put it up head to head to Augment Code to see how well it does. We're going to try out a number of different tests on a repo that I've been working on, which is essentially a clone of Anthropic's Claude artifacts feature. In this video, I'm going to quickly go over Augment themselves. I'm going to try and attempt to solve one tricky bug that I've been having a problem with. And I'm going to go ahead and try and add in a small little feature that I'm looking at adding in as well. Then I'll also focus on some of the features within Augment itself, just to get you familiar with the platform. Right off the bat, let's just touch on Augment. I've been using Augment since about December or so, off and on. And where they're different is they're really build and leaning into the part of the market that's designed for quote unquote real world work. Now, what do I mean by that? So if you've seen my channel, I've really reviewed a lot of these AI code IDEs. And generally speaking, what I do is I'll go and I'll create a project completely from scratch. One of the common criticisms with a lot of these AI IDEs and code editors is they're very good for some 0 to 1 work. But when you get in a large production code base that could be thousands or potentially even tens of thousands of files, that's where some of these don't actually perform as well with trying to retrieve the relevant files or go ahead and make particular updates. Where Augment is different is they've really focused on having an IDE that's up to date and indexed with all of the different changes that you make within your repository. There's a few different things going on. As soon as you put in a code base, it's going to go ahead and index that code base in a particular way. They have a proprietary way where you can go and, like I said, have a code base that's tens of thousands of files potentially, and they're going to break up that code base in a way that makes sense for coding specific tasks. From what I understand, under the hood, it's definitely more sophisticated with how they're actually storing and then retrieving that information. It's better to dive into the editor to just show you around a little bit. They do have both a VS Code as well as a JetBrains extension. Once you go through the installation steps, it's really easy to get started. Now, if it's the first time that you're using a repository, it's going to go ahead and index that repository. If it's a particularly large repository, it might just take a handful of seconds to go through and actually index everything. But once it's indexed, it's going to stay up to date as you make changes. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to add in a new feature within this project. I'm just going to say I want a React component. And what my plan with this is within here, we see that we now have these thinking tags. We see think, and then we have it stream out. We have the component here. We have the code. But the feature that I want to add is I want this to be filtered out to the user. I don't want the user to ever actually see either of these XML thinking tags. The first thing that I'm going to say is I'm going to say within the panel on the left-hand side, I do not ever want to see the XML tag think or think. Similar to how I am filtering out the developing tag, I want to do that as well. So I already do have some functionality within there where I am parsing out certain XML tags. As soon as I send it in, we'll get a response coming back very quickly. We'll see, I'll help you modify the code to filter out the think tag. Look at the client chat dashboard file. We need to update the render content function where the filtering happens. Within here, we can see all of the different tags here. I have developing and digesting, and now it's also added in this thinking tag as well. Remove any think tags and their content. That's a key piece that I actually don't want. I'm going to say instead of filtering out the thinking content, I want that portion to be wrapped in a span with a Tailwind class to make it italic. Let's go ahead and we'll send that through. And then once this comes back, if it comes back with a good generation, I'll go ahead and apply it and show you what that looks like. So here's where I love AI. I do not like regex at all. I like using it, but I do not like figuring out how to actually write it. So here we see the regex statement where it's filtering out the tag, but within here, we're also going to be adding it within this span here. Now, if I go ahead and apply this, it will go ahead and it will find the relevant information within the file. Now, the other thing with this that I like is, in my opinion, it's really built in a way for intentional changes within your code base, and it encourages you to actually read through what you're applying. Because with some of these agentic IDEs, the one problem that I see with this is if you set it free on potentially a gigantic repo that could potentially have some serious repercussions if you're editing files that you shouldn't be editing and what have you. What's different with this is it really forces you to see all of the pieces of the code base that you're changing if you follow the patterns that, in my opinion, it encourages. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to save this out. Here, I'm just going to say create a hello world component. All right, we see that it came back, but the span is actually rendering in line, and we still had the thinking tag as it was streaming out. Let's go back to the drawing board here, and I'm going to say, I want to not show the think tags while it is streaming. And for the solution above, it still showed the span within the markdown renderer. We'll go ahead, we'll send that through. We need to handle the think tags differently for streaming content and modify how we handle it in the markdown rendering. Let's just go ahead and apply this and see what it did here. Here's our proposed solution. So if it isn't streaming, it's proposing to use the markdown italic syntax. And for when it is streaming, remove the think tags completely. Let's go ahead and let's accept this. And then we also have this edit here as well, which I'll also accept. We'll go ahead and I'll save this out and try and render this again. So I'm going to say create a hello world component. We'll send that through. Now we have another issue, but we're starting to get within the vicinity of potentially where we want to go. It looked like it was delayed because when it was coming in, everything within that thought process was being hidden. Now we're going to try it again. And I'm going to say, I want to instead show everything within the think XML tags while it is streaming. Now, a lot of these tools, and that's the thing with AI, is it's going to be an iterative process. It's like your co-pilot in thinking through the different solutions. Let's go ahead and apply this. So during the streaming, extract the only contents within the think tags. And then we also have a little bit of conditional logic here. So let's go ahead. Let's save this out. Let's go back here and I'm going to say create a hello world component. I'll go ahead and I'll send that through. And we see, all right, the user asked me to create a hello world component. I need to figure out how this works. We have the thought process between these underscores here. I want to instead have this section of the markdown indented as it is streaming. We basically have what we want. Now we're just at the point where we just want to change some of the DOM elements of how it's actually streaming in and structured. It's going to modify our code here. We'll go ahead and apply this here. In this case, you can also just use the key bindings as well. If I command enter, that will accept all those changes. I can go ahead and command S. The other thing that's great with apply is as soon as you click it, even if you don't have the file open, it will just go ahead and do the same process. It will go through line by line, block by block of the changes that is proposed, and you can go ahead and accept them or reject them. Now I'm going to say create a hello world React component. I'll send that through and there we go. So we have it all indicated within this coding section here of the thought process. So we see, okay, I'll create a simple hello world React component. Since this is a self-contained React component, it can be reused. And then I can go from there. I can create a header and footer, create a linear gradient background, and there we go. So it looks great. We have our thinking process that is broken out here. And then we also have our functioning React components. Now that we've used it for a little bit and you get a sense on how it works, you go through the process, you ask for the code, it's all indexed. It can do gigantic repositories that are pretty complicated, and it will give you relevant suggestions that sort of push you in the direction of what you want to do. Now let's fire up Cursor. Now I have the same workspace open within Cursor here. I have it set to DeepSeek, which they just released hours before I recorded this. Next, I want to try and resolve a bug. Right now, there is some form of infinite loop issue with the streaming within the artifacts panel there. We see that we have this maximum depth updated, and it's repeatedly calling the set state inside the component, etc., so on and so forth. Here we see that it's an issue on this hook that I'm calling to set the artifacts. This is an issue that comes up in particular when I have multiple artifacts that are being rendered in. So let's copy this error, and I'm going to go within Cursor, and I'm going to say I have an issue when there are multiple artifacts being rendered and streamed out. the application will crash and show this error. I'll make sure I have DeepSeek R1 selected. And then you have the option where you can submit this or you can submit it with the code base. Let's go and submit it with the code base chat option. What it did here is it performed some sort of search algorithm where it ranked the different components within my project here based on what looks like the confidence, the relevance, or something to that effect. Then from here, it's getting the final code base context. It's going through certain files that I have. I have some very large files within here. So you can see within here, it's grabbing different pieces and we have the context. Within here, we have the thinking tags. This is similar to what we just solved with the R1 issue within our application. And now we see, okay, let's try and figure out what the user is getting with the maximum update depth exceeded error. Looking at the code here, we have this pretty big block of the thoughts that the R1 model had within Cursor. And then once it finishes, it says, okay, the error occurs in the stream artifact content function where the artifacts are being added one by one, causing infinite re-renders. Here's how to fix that. We have the start line, we have the end line, and we have the key changes and what have you. And then it's also telling us to use the effect dependency array for the correct artifact state management. Let's go ahead and apply this so you can accept it similar to Augment. Now the apply is a little bit different. So that looks to be all the changes here. Let's go back. Let's try this again. I'm going to say, I want 5 distinct visual React artifacts. We'll go ahead, let's send this in and let's see if it resolved that issue. So here we go, we have the thought process and now our application just completely crashed. This is something that I haven't quite seen. Within here, it looks like it potentially introduced a bug here. So let's just circle back on some of the changes that it made here. Now, if we take a closer look on why this crashed and we look at the code here, we see that within here, it's actually removing quite a bit of functionality that is required for the application. Let's just go ahead and put a pin in this and hop back over to Augment and try the exact same question. I'll go within VS Code here. I'll scroll back to the bottom and I'll paste in this exact same message here. I have the issue where there are multiple artifacts rendering. There we go. The issue is likely caused by multiple state updates triggering re-renders in a loop. Let's modify the artifact streaming logic to be more efficient and prevent infinite loops. I just want to pause for a second and actually just review the two side by side. Here within Augment, we got the response pretty quickly, but if I go over to Cursor, there was actually a completely different process that it took on how it retrieved the information. And I think this is really the key point on something to highlight within Augment that's different than some of these AI IDEs, because what Augment does is they really focus on indexing and keeping a live index of your code base where it will go ahead and perform that retrieval augmented generation, where it will search relevant pieces of code, where it's able to successfully find the relevant context of what you're asking for with natural language within your code base. And that's something that's different, is it's not actually performing this search algorithm that Cursor is doing under the hood. I'm not entirely sure what this is, so it does seem to rank the files, but if I'm just thinking about it in the context of a code base that's like tens of thousands of lines of code, I'm not sure exactly how this search functionality would work. That's the claim with Augment, is if you have something with thousands of files or tens of thousands of files, it potentially is a better approach than some of these steps that are within Cursor right now. Let's go back and take a look here. The issue is likely caused by multiple state updates triggering re-renders in a loop. Let's modify the artifact streaming logic to be more efficient and prevent infinite loops. Here we go. It went right in to find that relevant piece. And we have this full code block here. So let's apply this. Let's see what the diff looks like. In this case, let's go ahead and accept this. We can go ahead and accept them one by one, or alternatively, you can just Command Enter at any point and save them out just like that. I'm going to say create 5 visual artifacts. I'll go ahead and I'll submit that. And within here, we see that it's streaming out. All right, so now let's hop back to Augment. I'm going to put in this exact same piece of code here. And we see the error occurs because there's a circular dependency in the state updates. Looking at the code, I can see that the issue is in the stream artifact content function, where multiple state updates are triggering re-renders that cause more state updates. Here we see that it's giving us the block of code, And if we take a look at the code here, we see the diffs of some of the changes that it made. And in terms of what it's looking to edit, is the tweaks are actually a little bit more subtle than what we had previously seen. It's not removing big blocks of code. And we actually have also some other functionality here where it's batching some of the state updates as well. I'll just go ahead and let's take a look at what this looks like. So I'm going to say create 5 visual React components. Within here, we see it's rendering all of those out, and it would actually look like it potentially solved our issue. So let's just test this a couple times here. So let's say create 5 SaaS landing pages in HTML. Here we go. It's thinking through the process. We're going through, it's streaming all of that out. We have our HTML file. Next, I'm going to say create a diverse set of visual artifacts. I'll submit that. It goes through the thought process. We're going through, it's creating a number of different components here, and it didn't crash on any of them. It actually solved that. Like, I am genuinely impressed because this is a non-trivial application. This took me some time. Now, these are just silly little diagrams and stuff here, but just the fact that it was able to solve that in effectively one shot, right? Like, Cursor is something that I use all the time, and nothing to knock Cursor. Like, it's a great option for particular use cases. But honestly, Augment is very interesting with their approach on how they're building out their IDE extension, because being able to index your repository in a lot of ways, if you do that well, and if you really focus on that portion, you could potentially have a very effective tool across a giant enterprise application. Another thing that I want to highlight is within here is the QA process. Is because there is that effective retrieval within this, I could ask something like, what type of components are supported within the artifacts functionality? I'll go ahead and I'll send that through. It's generating the response, and almost instantly it gives us this breakdown. The code artifacts, we have this ant artifacts. Within here, it can render Markdown, it can render HTML. Within here, it can also render SVGs, it can render Mermaid, it can render React, and it even gives examples. Here it shows the tokens that stream in. We have the developing here, and then we have the identifiers, which is effectively how the Claude interface also works, where you have these XML tags as well as these attributes indicating different aspects about the artifact, like the title and the language and what have you. Let's test it within Cursor and see what it says. The user is thinking about XYZ, it's going through, and it will take a moment to give its inner monologue there. If we just break this down, within the list, we have mermaid diagrams, we have code blocks, which there are code blocks, but it didn't indicate what type. There is streaming artifacts, which is interesting because it's actually not following the same pattern here. We have interactive components, so copy to clipboard, expand collapse sections. We have the specialized input component, and so on and so forth. But if we go back to Augment, with the exact same question, we have, based on the provided code and the system message, here are the supported artifact types and their specifications. We have code artifacts, we have documents, Markdown, HTML, SVGs, mermaid diagrams, and React components. This is the right answer here. This is what I have set up within the application. It can support SVGs, mermaid diagrams, React components, and it gives me even the exact example, whereas within Cursor and DeepSeek, it didn't quite do that. Let's pivot and let's use Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which is arguably probably one of the more preferred models for developers, especially within Cursor. So we have Mermaid, we have code blocks, we have Markdown content. So even here, so we have Mermaid, code blocks, and Markdown content. Let's try it in a completely new chat here. And let's just go ahead and let's send it through here. What type of components are supported within the artifacts functionality? Within here, we have HTML, we have SVG, we have React, Mermaid, code blocks, Markdown, and here it's giving us the breakdown. So when I switch to Claude 3.5 Sonnet and I clear the conversation, it does give me a little bit of a better response here. We have the HTML content, we have the SVG graphic, and then we have some comments describing for React, Mermaid, as well as the code blocks and Markdown here. And then within here, we have the switch statement that it did grab correctly. So overall, I definitely encourage you to check out Augment, especially if you're working within a team setting or a large code base. Now, the other great thing with this is you can try it out completely for free. If you're interested in these types of tools, you will be able to try this out and see if you like it. This is going to be more expensive than something like Cursor or Windsurf or these IDEs. But if you are working in a large code base, or if you just want that type of coding where it's very specific, maybe you're a solopreneur or something like that, and you have a relatively large application, and you want something with some really good underlying techniques on how you can leverage AI within an IDE. It's a very thought out process. I do encourage you to check it out. Otherwise, that's pretty much it for this video. If you found this video useful, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Otherwise, until the next one.